Hi, everybody. Make rocket ship go now. I am Robert Ogilvy, Executive Strategist and EQ Coach. Glad you could join me here for another live training. So today's question, today's issue is how do you get alignment and with others, particularly other teams outside of your direct contacts, your direct reports, your direct staff that you control. Um, even in that context, even when you don't have some authority, even when you're not, directly, they're not directly reporting to you. Um, so I'm just going to first of all recap why this is important. Um, ultimately, in a business, in an organization, there's lots of things you could do, lots of places you could put your labor, your effort, your thinking, your resources, whatever, right? So part of the value of any good strategy is that it helps you prioritize. These things are more valuable than these things. When faced with some conflict, when faced with some decision, when faced with some trade-off, here's what you should value, right? And so when that's working well, that helps kind of unify and clarify things for a lot of people. But for lots of reasons that's not the case. I won't get into all of it, but let's just take a quick snapshot. The business case of what you're doing isn't clear. People are working on their own kind of short and long term, but also just different kind of siloed and separate business cases, and that also then for lots of reasons can stem from just almost like people politics, managerial politics. So there's no good business reason, but there are power plays involved, right? There's also some organizational laws and norms, which are basically that like so we know that even as you add more team members to even an individual team, they become pound per pound, person per person, less marginally contributive, less motivated, less productive, right? And that's true organizationally, right? And so that means as organizations get quite a bit larger into the medium and really large size, there's almost just like a certain amount of inefficiency just baked in, right? And so and it becomes harder to steer the ship and change any direction, right? But this is a whole, where does disorganization come from, right? That's a whole other ball of wax, so I won't get into this. The thing we're talking about today is alignment and how do we align a bunch of teams. Okay. Um, so it's with I'll just tell you what the four secrets are. It's with trust and engagement. Um, you're doing it with shared data, shared KPIs. You're doing it with shared sense making, and if all those fails or in a very political environment, you can use win-win thinking, win-win trade-offs. So let's just go into what these are. So first of all, the premise of all of this is that you need more trust and engagement, right? There is no, if you look at basically all the different team development, team process models, they're all starting with some kind of like, we need good rapport, we need good trust. There's something about us being able to, they might frame it as even like talking openly and honestly might be the frame of it. But this is a critical piece for not just one team, but any group of people, multiple teams to be able to cooperate together, right? And this is also kind of the basis if you think of the six team conditions, the one of the three essential conditions, the real team part of it is that they're able to cooperate, and that the nature of how they're working, how they're adding value, means they must cooperate, right? If things can be individually parsed out to individuals that can just, blinders ahead, do their thing, then it's not a team. It's just a group, right? If you've ever worked in a call center, there might be 100 people working around you, but let me tell you, they are not a team. They're just 100 individual beings, right? That's not a team. They're not cooperating together. Um, there's lots of ways you can build trust and engagement, but first of all, getting trust and engagement is the first thing. So I want to keep reminding people of that trust and engagement, and that's part of why we naturally want to get people to build up EQ and leadership skills as they're impacting others and having a longer tenure and just dealing with more people, stakeholders, clients, employees in an organization, right? How people feel matters, how much trust you have matters, how much you can but even more cerebrally, how much you can understand their needs and your needs, like this is an important piece of this, right? So trust engagement. And that's not even really a tactic so much as to say, it's important, don't leave it out, right? Don't think you can just, I guess this is back to the point of like, this is particularly important when you don't have authority. It's always important anyways, but it's particularly important if you don't have authority. Okay, first big one, which is a bit more prescriptive. You need shared data. You need to find a shared KPI, a shared business or outcome KPI that actually makes sense. So I'll give you a sense of why this is really important to align things, right? So you might all be doing some process, you might be selling some service, but if one team's goal is to produce as many units of that thing or sell as many units as possible, and another team's goal is to to produce those units at a really high quality, or maybe to have as high a value, like as high a retention you can per customer as possible. Like these might be intention, right? And a simple kind of production way of thinking of it is this. Yeah, getting my hands mixed up. This unit wants to produce such many units. This wants them to have 0.001% defects, right? And these are intention, right? Because if we produce this many, we're going to have 2% defects, and if we only produce this many, we're not going to have enough to sell, right? So finding some way for those people to talk and find a KPI which actually makes sense that they can share together makes sense. Because now it's like you're unifying those teams, you're aligning those teams under something that they can both agree on, as opposed to constantly being in tension, right? This also is going to show you that there are like underlying business KPIs of how a team is operating, and they're often not ever going to say that they need less of that thing, right? When have you ever heard of an IT team that said they didn't need more IT development? When have you ever heard of a marketing team that said they didn't want more marketing firepower? And you could go ad nauseum, right? So this is also getting the teams to start to think that there's a bigger view here, and we all need to interoperate together, as opposed to just amping up and the supposed espoused value of this at the trade-off of something else, right? So if you can find some shared data, some shared KPI, the better. And I would even say objective data is more objective data is a good way to try to find that shared KPI. I'm spending too much time on this stuff. I got to move faster if I'm going to hit all my points. Second is shared sense making, and really this is that as you're dealing with more complex systems, there's more problems and more changes that can come up, but there's also just more factors to include, right? So if you're involved in those discussions around strategy, and you're trying to make sense and grapple with, get a sense of direction, get a sense of how to orient the problem well together, that actually really helps, right? That actually really helps align the people involved. And this is the kind of stuff, and it might feel in initial stages, it's like we're having these conversations. They might feel a little bit ambly, but you're actually kind of perspective swapping and you're data swapping with each other, which itself is naturally trust and engagement building. But you're trying to come up with a more comprehensive sense of things together, right? And so even just being able to sit down with other teams and how are you? And it's not even debating over point. How are you seeing it? How am I seeing it? It's let's make sense of this context we're in, and the more change there is in the context, the better, because you're grokking on this thing together with you guys, right? And even the output of that, what's the output of sense making? It's a good mental model. It's a good story. It's a good kind of orienting lens you can put on, right? If you can find a good shared mental model, that is fantastic. That really helps get people not just working in the same direction, but make it simple and clear for people. That is super aligning. That is fantastic. So having those discussions, talking about what makes sense to do and not make sense, yeah, really, really important. The last one, and it's not a great suggestion, but I'll give this to you with a bit of a caveat, which is that if you're using this, it's probably a sign things are not going super stellar. It's just win-win trade-offs, or what it's more blunt, you might heard it as quid pro quo, right? And so it's all right, you want help from me, what are you going to do for me, right? And then you get into kind of swapping favors and resources. You can do that, and it might be, listen, you give me a bit of that labor, that team member I need, I'll get a bit of this team member. It could be something else. So here's why this is bad, right? If things are in that political environment, there's no long-term time horizon, and things are very defensive and siloed, right? It's tribal, right? And so it might help solve the problem in the short term, but it's not building some bigger long-term shared future, shared vision, shared mental model together. So if you find yourself using the win-win trade-off a lot, newsflash, you are in a hostile environment, and either you need to deeply transform that or get into a new environment, right? It's very bad. There's lots of other people which have great thoughts around team alignment at larger scales, and we'll get into. And some of these are more from a coaching standpoint. How do you develop good managers and executives, and how that scales out, because they're doing the same. And some are more spec for these very high change environments. If you think of General McChrystal, his approach to team of teams is again, it's like the quick process adaptation, and so it starts to feel like agile teams, right? But these are lots of ways to start to crack these nut. This is a huge field, so we're not going to actually solve this in 10 minutes, but again, so if you're having these alignment problems, it all starts with trust and engagement. Look at good data, try to find a good shared KPI, good business KPI you can have together. Sense make together, find a good shared mental model, and ultimately, if all else fails, win-win, but that's a bad sign. I'm Robert Ogilvy, Executive Strategist and EQ Coach. I'll see you guys next time.